In this video, I'll be showing you how I use Army Painter Speedpaints to get a really easy to pull off little highlight on your miniatures. Now this is a method that I've used loads in past videos, especially on things like my Space Marines, but I haven't really actually talked about what I do and how I pull it off. So I figured I'd make a very quick video to do so. Now to demonstrate this process, I'm using these 4 Dragon Ball miniatures, which are part of the latest Kickstarter by Effortless Alchemist. They kindly sent them over to me to play with, and I figured that these would let me try some really bright and vivid colours. So first up, I just primed them all white, so that way I get the most out of my speed paints and my contrast paints for that first base layer, and then I picked out a few different colours. Now you might be looking at these and going, these are really haphazard and random colours, and they are. That's because I wasn't really sure what I was going to go for, and I figured I wanted to test out a range of different bright colours as I got through this, just so that way it would show off different results on different types of colours at the end. So first up, I used Poppy Red, and I popped this down all over the skin and the scales and everything else, anywhere we wanted that nice bright red. This is quite a nice speed paint because it's not too bright, it's a nice little mid-tone to use. Gets in there, adds some nice shadow, but also gets some nice highs in there. Next up, I used Aldari Emerald, and I popped this all over the armour. And this is one of my absolute favourite contrast paints. It's a beautiful colour, it's got some really nice deeps in there, some nice vivid highs as well. And it's got really good coverage. Once I've done that, I grabbed some hardened leather speed paint and sloshed this over anywhere that I wanted that leathery brownness all over, on the spear shaft as well, and then moved across onto the next colours. Next up, some of the minis have this like padding all over them, so I grabbed some purple swarm and sloshed that on there, and I wanted something that would go quite nicely with it, so for all the cloaks and everything like that, I used Moonlight Coral. For all of the weapons and everything, I decided to play around a bit, and I used a yellow ink on that to get this really nice bright yellow. In hindsight, I wish I'd just gone from one of the new contrast paints because they have some incredible yellows, but the yellow ink looked fine. Once I'd got all of my base colours down, I grabbed some Nuln Oil and I sloshed that bad boy all over, going pretty heavy with this as well because I'd just done a white undercoat and I didn't have any of that Xenophil to play with. I left them there, let them dry for a bit, and then came back to it. And normally at this stage where you go back in and you either just hit them with a dry brush, or you go back in and you pick out some colours and you do your edge highlighting and you get onto the nitty gritty bit where you're just having to play around with the colours. So for the next stage, this is where it's just easy and effective. Normally what I will do in my process, I will just grab that cream dry brush and just hit some of those areas, and it just makes it all kind of pop a bit. But sometimes you're left with a little bit of dustiness, sometimes it just looks a little bit weird and lazy. So one thing that I've been playing around with recently is thinning down my speed paints with some speed paint medium. So I go in there with a cream dry brush and go quite heavy with this. And if you really want to make those highlights pop, once you've done your cream dry brush, go back in there with a white dry brush and you can pick out some of those areas that you want them to be really bright with your highlights. Once that's done, you don't need to worry about any of the dustiness because this is where we come back in with some of the speed paint or contrast paint, or I suppose any paint if you wanted to. Grab your palette, grab the color of your choice, and then thin it down with some speed paint medium. I normally go for 1 drop of speed paint and 3 drops of speed paint medium. You don't want to go too thin because otherwise you won't get the colour across onto it, but basically we're turning this into a glaze. Now the colours that I use to highlight, I use Carmine Dragon for all of the bright reds, Caribbean Ocean as well, and I pop this all over the armour just to make that pop a bit more, and Familiar Pink over all of the cloak. Now you might end up needing to use a couple of coats of this, but depending on how bright you want it to go. So for this, once you've gotten to the consistency that you want, you start popping your paints and your colours all over it. It's a nice glaze-like consistency, and what it does is it takes away any of that dustiness, but it tints all of that cream or that bright white that you've put on there with the colour that you're popping down. You don't need to just aim for the bits that have that highlight on it, you can slosh it all over that coloured area. And the good thing is, so for example on the armour, that Caribbean blue that I'm using, it really gets in there, so any of that excess just helps to darken down some of those shadows that I want, but it really picks out some of those high points. Pop it all over your model and just go with the consistency that you want to work with. Like I said, I use 1 drop of speed paint to 3 drops of speed paint medium, but sometimes if you really want to pick out that colour and just make it look even brighter and make it pop a little bit more, you can go for just a standard speed paint or just thin it down a little bit more instead. And that, in a nutshell, is it. It's a really easy method to use, and you don't need to use speed paints or contrast paints for all the base layers. You can use whatever colours that you like. You can use your standard acrylics, you can use whatever. Go back in there with that dry brush, or even if you want to pick out some edge highlighting, and then you can use something like a speed paint or a contrast paint will work as well. Thin it down a little bit and then pop it over there. It's not reinventing the wheel, this has been done time and time again, but it's something that I get asked about every so often in my videos because I talk about it briefly, but I've never explained it, so hopefully that helps. I'm really happy with the way these turned out. There's some nice bright punchy colours. Some of them don't necessarily work together, but all in all, I'm quite happy with how these turned out. The only thing that I wish I'd maybe played around a little bit more with is the weapons. I wasn't too sure where to take that yellow with afterwards, but here they are. So if you like these minis by Effortless Alchemist, I'll have the link to their Kickstarter down below. They're always worth checking out. I've done a couple of videos now on their stuff before. I really like the sculpts. These turned out very nice. There's a lot of detail on there and a lot to like. Hope that method has helped you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you use a similar thing? Do you use something different? Do you have any other speed hacks when it comes to like edge highlighting or just getting those highlights in there? My issue in the past has always been using something like a contrast paint or a speed paint. When it gets to the highlighting stage, using just a standard acrylic or something like that can sometimes just look a little bit too, I don't know, they just don't necessarily work together particularly well when it gets to highlighting. But this way, you get to use something that's quite similar in consistency and tone and everything else, and it just blends very nicely. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you have, hit the like and subscribe button. Come along for some more content in the future. I'll see you soon. Bye.